for both parties, Baruch Hashem, aside for myself and aside for yourself, we support each other. Second of all, I want to speak about the fact that this is going to be our fourth shiur, Baruch Hashem. Now, the Maisa is that the second shiur's recording, which was the second part about the story of Yeshua Hanosvi, that recording, one small part went unfortunately shut off in the middle, because I talked the text in the middle, so the recording shut off. And I just have to fill that in, which I could easily do. So I'm going to make sure to have that, done by the end of this week. And that way, we could send it out. And we can have the first recording already was sent out. We'll have the second recording, the third recording. A bunch of people from last week, a bunch of people took their own private recordings, but I have my own recording, which is right in front of me, so it's a stronger recording in a way. And I will send that also together at the end of this week. Now, the topic I want to talk about today, let's get right to business and save the wait. The topic I want to talk about today is going to most probably have to have a second class. Because unlike last week's topic, which is a very, very important topic, but nevertheless is something which is more, we don't discuss that very often. This is a very fundamental topic, and that is the difference between the Ashkenazic and Sefardic approach to Agada. This is a very, very important subject. The Ma'amakemis that you have over here, which are 14 sources, make up less than a fifth, like last week, less than a fifth of the actual sources. And there is so much more. As you're going to see, the Kohen Gadol says when he reads the Hakel, this is the Shnas Hakel, much more than you have written here. What that I've read before you is written here. There's so many sources on the subject. We're going to try to be mitzamtzim and try to get to the point. Let us begin with a fundamental point. There is a great scholar by the name of Avraham Grossman, together with Professor Yisroel Toshma, are probably in the last 70 years the greatest scholars on Ashkenazic Jewish history. When I say Ashkenazic Jewish history, I'm talking about the history of Rashi and the Teves, who believe it or not are Ashkenazi Jews. When we say Ashkenaz, we're not talking specifically about Germany. The word Ashkenaz is similar to Askenaz, which is Saxon, if you rearrange the words. And it means Saxon Jew. So I guess everybody around this table is a Saxon Jew. Hello, my fellow Saxon Jews. But I can find out either way, the Maisa is that Sachsen, as they call it in German,
as
nevertheless,
Anglo-Saxon?
I'm sorry, as an Anglo-Saxon, the Saxons came from Germany originally, that's right. Tribe of Germans. But upon them either way, when we say Ashkenaz, we're not just talking about Germany. It's talking about Germany and France, as well as northern Italy, as well as England, as well as parts of Austria, as well as parts of Bohemia. Basically, we're talking about the world of the Teves. How do we know what Ashkenaz means? The answer is a very simple definition. We know that Rashi and Rashi's entire family trace their heritage back to the city of Worms, where Rashi, and according to the Megillas Yuchsidah, the Luria family, and according to many, many other sources, where Rashi actually originated from, his family originated from the city of Worms, Germany. Rashi himself mentions on his mother's side his uncle, Rav Shimon Azokin of Magense, and we know that Rashi studied in Germany. Rashi's family originates from there. That's because all Ashkenazic Jewry begin from really three cities: Shapiro, Vermeiz, and Magense. Speyer, Worms, and Mainz, which are cities that are located along the Rhine River. And we know that the great Emperor Charlemagne, we're talking now in the 9th century, 8th century, 9th century, that Kufa, the Emperor Charlemagne invited all of the Jews, and a little before that actually, invited all the Jews to come from Italy and from other parts of the world, even as far as Babylon, to come to settle along the Rhine River, because he wanted to strengthen that part of his kingdom. And that is the founding of Ashkenaz. It's called Kehilos Shum, the communities of Shum, Shapiro, Vermeiz, against Speyer, Worms, and Mainz, which are all three cities located along the Rhine River. That's the river in the south of Germany that separates between France and Germany. Now, they expanded. Historians believe that the settlement of Ashkenazic Jewry expanded all the way until the Loire River, which is a river that cuts through the south/center of France. Hence the family name Luria, which is a common Ashkenazi name, Luria, starting from the Arizal to the David Luria of Bichov to the Marshal to Professor Ben Luria and many, many other famous Lurias. The name Luria is a variant of the name of Loire. And Loire is the river that flows through France, which basically symbolizes the border of Ashkenazic Jewry. Anything south of the Loire, pretty much, with some exceptions, it's not exact. There are some cities south of that are also Mouvla, Pesechat, but bottom line, anything south of that is considered pretty much the world of Provence, which is an intermediate south of France, which at the time was a separate country, and it's considered an intermediate between Ashkenaz and Sfard. The borders can clearly be seen by the Nusach HaTfilah. Ashkenaz, Daven, Nusach Ashkenaz, with different variants, by the way. There was not one single Nusach Ashkenaz. The famous Professor Goldschmidt, who was the biggest tchum in the tchum of literature of yes, what's his first name? Was Goldschmidt's first name David Goldschmidt? I forgot his first name already. Doniel Goldschmidt. I remember something like that. But in any case, the famous Professor Goldschmidt, who's the greatest thinker in the Tchum of the Nusach HaTfilah, points out that all of the Jews, whether they came from Bohemia, France, northern Italy, even central Italy, by the way, believe it or not, England, all of these communities shared a common Nusach. Of course, this all came to an end when the Hasidim decided to ditch their Ashkenazi heritage, and they decided to adopt the Nusach HaTfilah, the Sfardim, not even exactly. They made a Sholem Nusach, a combination of both.
When did that happen?
But by the way, that happened from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was the one who did it. That was one of the big tainas in the Snagdim, which is why it was so painful for them, because to them, Nusach Ashkenaz was, the Nusach of Rashi and Amalei HaTosfos. You could see the pain that they had on the Hasidim in the famous kidnapping that was done when that Misnagid decided to kidnap the Alter Rebbe for 3 hours like a monster. And he screamed at the Alter Rebbe. What was he screaming? Na, Ritzoch, gefällt euch nicht, noch der neue Nusach Kesser. The only thing is, he was a bit crooked, because he failed to mention the Nusach Ashkenaz wasn't exactly one. There were different variants. For example, in France, they would say Kesser. But I can put it either way, so bottom line, so therefore Nusach Ashkenaz wasn't exactly set in stone. That's what the Hasidim felt to gesund, to leben, to lange Yom. That's why the Hasidim felt, rightfully so, that they had the right to adopt certain modes from the Sephardim Nusach, because the Ashkenaz Nusach itself wasn't set in stone. However, there's one thing Hasidim refused to adopt, and that is poetry of the Sephardim. When it comes to poetry, they only recite Ashkenazic poetry, basically, with some exceptions, and that's because the Arizal himself only recited Ashkenazic poetry, as the Chidah brings down, the Mishnah Hasidim brings down, from the walls of Lashona and many, many other sources.
The reason was Ashkenaz?
Father Ashkenaz, mother Sfard, so genetically, he's both. Oof. But halachically, he's Ashkenaz. Because halachic, genetic is by who your blood is. Halachic is by who your father is. That establishes your halachic status. Kohen Levi Yisrael, that's the Masada goes. So halachically, he's Ashkenaz, genetically, he's both. Equally both, by the way. So you like the Arizal, so let me fly. I can find him either way. The Maisa is, today we're going to discuss two perspectives. Now, why am I saying this? It's important to understand that was the world that the Baalei HaTosfos flourished in. The Baalei HaTosfos is Ashkenaz. Now, as much as Hasidim, when it came to Nusach HaTfilah, adopted different things from the Sfardim, when it came to poetry, and more important than poetry, when it came to halacha, the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch is literally 95% Mogen Avraham, which in turn is based pretty much 1000% on the Ramah. So the Mesorah is very simple. It's Tosfos, the Rosh, the Mordechai, with their Talmudim. Sometimes that's a Tumas Hadeshin, Yisrael Orach. That's all Tosfos, the Rosh, and the Mordechai, to the Tur, and the Ramah, Mogen Avraham, Alter Rebbe. This is a firm policy. There's even a tshuva of Alter Rebbe, by the way. I couldn't believe it when the Sefer Rav Eliyazi, he has over there a tshuva of Alter Rebbe, where Alter Rebbe says, like I between the Urzaru and the Ram, that Hayos the Osbnei Ashkenaz have a connection to the Urzaru. We cannot leave the Urzaru to follow the Ram after the Kach. So we should know it's quite a firm principle, which would mean to say that not only our Ampiram getting closer to the point, not only our halacha is meant to be based on the derech of the Baalei HaTosfos, but our hashkafa as well. And indeed, we will see that our hashkafa today is almost 1000% based on the Baalei HaTosfos, but we get the perspective of the Baalei Tosfos via the Arizal, the Maharal, and the Shalom, who in turn give it over to the Baal Shem Tov, and then the Alter Rebbe, and then our perspective today. But pretty much, it's quite clear that this is the way things work. Now, one of the incredible things about the medieval period is the battle against the Rambam. Now, you want to ask yourselves a question. Give me a second. The Rambam is a very powerful opinion, isn't he? How come he doesn't show up in Tosfos Kemat ever? You know how many times the Rambam shows up in Tosfos? Well, let me tell you, he shows up 4 times. One is Menachos Daf Mem Beis, hence Rambam's Rosh Teves Re'ei Menachos Mem Beis. That's a Rebbe's, not mine. It's an old Rebbe's. Another is Brachos Mem Daled Amud Aleph, and another is Ksubis Pei Vav Amud Aleph. He shows up with the title Rabbeinu Moshe the Minor, different titles, but then he shows up, and that's only 3 times in the whole Tosfos by his name. He shows up a 4th time with a very interesting title. He shows up again in, give me a moment, in Megillah, the Lamed Aleph on the days, and here there is some debate if it means him, but most commentaries believe it's him because the quote comes from him, with the following title, where Tosfos slugs up a certain shita in halacha, and Tosfos says, not like the words of the captain of the ship that's turning everything over and confusing everybody. And he goes on to slug up a psak of the Rambam, and most opinions hold that is the Rambam. As you understand yourself, there was a lot of anger at the Rambam. Most of our Tosfos comes from the author, Rabbi Lezer of Tuch. Tuch is short for Tuchheim, a German city. Rabbi Lezer was Franco-German. He lived both in France and Germany. He authored the Tosfos on all 13 big Masechtas. When I say big Masechtas, I mean Bava Metzia, Bava Kama, Bava Basra, Shabbos, Gittin. One of the 13 big Masechtas. Chulin is also considered the massive one. Nida is also considered the massive one. All the Yeshivisha plus the rest of them, all 13 heavy hitters. With the exception of Kiddushin. On Kiddushin, he also authored a Tosfos, but it didn't make it onto the page. Instead, the printer, Rav Gershon Sansino, himself a descendant, by the way, of the Moshe Shapiro, who helped the authoring of the Tosfos, that has helped Rabbi Elazar write the Tosfos. For some reason, on Kiddushin, nobody knows why, he chose Tosfos Chachmei Ivra, the rabbis of Evere, in the north of France, near the German border, except not Rabbi Elazar and Taka the Maharan writes, the Tosfos on the Masechta Kiddushin are very hard to understand. And Taka we have today, Rabbi Elazar Mituch's Tosfos, they're much clearer. Rabbi Elazar Mituch was gifted with a Meirdik pen and the ability to condense Tosfos in the most ingenious manner. But Rabbi Elazar Mituch in Tosfos itself is not an original writer, he's a collector. His own Chidushim he wrote on Gillian Tosfos. He showed him, some of it shows up on the side of the Tosfos in the margin, some of it shows up as Agada in Tosfos, some of it shows up in the Shittim Okubetzes, actually a lot of it does. Gillian Tosfos and different things. But in the actual Tosfos, he was just a collector, a genius writer. As many as the Maharik Rabbi Yosef Kolon, a great Italian Ashkenazi Jewish rabbi, teacher of the Bartanura during the Kuf of the 1400s, he says something very interesting. He says, Mimeme Tosfos Tuchon Shoysa, Asher Kitzeres Tosfos Shantz. Tosfos Shantz is the Rashi Shantz of Shimshon of sense, who, mind the pun, always made a lot of sense. But I'm saying this pun not just to be cute. He was taka, not just sense, much more than sense. I was just being cute now, but he was the power of logic itself. Shimshon Shantz is the power of logic itself. Shimshon Shantz authored most of the Tosfos that we have. The thing is, he wrote very, very ba'arichistic. He wrote extremely ba'arichos. And because he wrote so ba'arichos, his Tosfos had to be condensed. And that was, of course, the job of Rabbi Elazar Mituch, who condensed his Tosfos and shortened it into a very, very short, condensed form. The Rashi Shantz was very, very upset at the Rambam. He lived in the Tkufa right after Rabbeinu Tam, so we're talking about the latter half of the 12th century, the early half of the 13th century. The Rashi Shantz eventually made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, and settled in Eretz Yisrael. He's buried somewhere in the base Alman Ayosham of Haifa, but nobody knows exactly where. So it remains a mystery. Where his exact burial location, we have no idea. Some have him was buried in Akko, some have him was buried in Haifa, but somewhere in the old Beis HaChaim, along the shores of the Mediterranean, he's buried. We're not exactly sure where, but he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. He was very, very angry at the Rambam. He was not still angry, he was fuming at the Rambam for many of the Rambam's shittas, which is why he boycotted the Rambam. And he refused to mention the Rambam once in his entire commentary on Seder Zroyim and Seder Taharas and Mishnayos. He boycotted the Rambam completely. And even in this Teves itself, which again most of the Teves and Shas comes from Rebbe Elazar Mituch, who is Mekatzer Teves Shams, he refuses to mention the Rambam. Poshet boycotts the Rambam completely. Now, one of the things that bothered him about the Rambam is the Rambam's approach to Agodas Hashas. The Rambam's approach to Agodas Hashas is a very, very interesting one. The Rambam's approach to Agodas Hashas is as follows. The Rambam says the following Lashon. But before that, let's go through a little bit of the list we have over here. Much of the information I'm telling you tonight comes from the writings of Professor Avram Grossman, who is a great scholar in the Talmud of Ashkenazic and Sefardic and Sefardic Scholars. You could look up in his articles, which you could find online, Shoroshev Shel Kiddush Hashem Ba'Ashkenazic Duma. Also, some research was done by Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, who is a very secular thinker. Religious law and change in the medieval Ashkenazi experience, but we're going to knock this shita. Now, basically, the point is as follows. Jump for a second to 4, Igros HaRambam, Mahaduras Yud Shelat, Yerushalayim Tavshin Ches Amatav Samach Aleph, the letters of the Rambam. So if you take a look in the letters of the Rambam, you'll find that the Rambam writes the following statement. The Rambam says, quite clearly, as follows. Kol oisam hadvorim divrei hagoda heim. Ve'ein makshin b'hagoda. You can't ask any questions on hagoda. V'chidivrei kabbalah heim. Is there a real tradition to the hagodas hashas b'chlal? Or you mean the svara? Or is it logical even the hagodas hashas? Ela kol echad ve'echad. Ma'ayin the posek k'vi mashiyur boy. Every rabbi would look at the posek according to what he saw fit. Ve'ein bazal divrei kabbalah. Is no real tradition to hagodas hashas. You can already see why the Rashi Shams is getting angry.
Where does the Rambam write this?
This is a clear truth of the Rambam. Igros Rambam, I just showed you 4. Take a look. 4. I know what 4. Yeah, for the record, Yud Shelat is a Yitzchak Shelat. Before he decided to Zionitize his name, his original name was Greenspan, but of course Greenspan is too Golos. It's too Yiddish, so he had to change it to Shelat. He's considered today, he's a genius in the Chumar Rambam, the biggest in the world today. And his son decided to become a Lubavitcher and started Project Sama in Israel. Moshe Shelat. And Moshe Shelat, I met him. He's a canon, the guy. A very stark Lubavitcher. It's so funny, like him and his father, 2 different planets. His father's like this Mizrachistische professor. Divrei HaRambam, Ktuvim B'Sefer, and like the difference between the father and son is like this guy's like a Lubavitcher. But that's history for you, my friends. I can put him either way. The bottom line is, but Greenspan, a.k.a. Shelat, we'll have to call him Shelat because he's had to change his name. When he was a little boy already, he became a prodigy. He was a young bacher. He was writing articles to Shlog up Kapach, Rabbi Yosef Kapach, who at the time was a Yemenite, Arabic-speaking Yemenite scholar who understood the Rambam's writings in the original Arabic, and yet he would shlug him up. He would actually, like this young little boy, would write articles and literally take on the biggest Rambam scholar of his time. When I say scholar, I don't mean Lumdus. Lumdus, the biggest scholar, of course, is the Rebbe. I'm talking about research. And even in that, the Rebbe is the biggest, but that's another story. I can point on either way. The fact of the matter is, he became very famous already as a kid, a prodigy. Until today, he's the biggest mumche in Rambam. When Steinsaltz's Rambam, they put out Evan Yisrael's Rambam, is based on his Mahadur. So the kid, he says like this. He says like this. There's no tradition, you can't paskin, don't ask me questions, my God. The Kitzur, the Rambam takes a Godas Hashas and says clearly, they're just cute pirushim that any rabbi made up at the time, have no basis in any fact. Now let me read to you what the Rashi Shans has to say about such a statement.
What's included in Agodas Hashas?
We'll get to that. Very good question. All this will be discussed. I always say one after the other. So let me read to you the words of Rashi Shans so you understand where Rav Achiva Lahifechom Abal comes from. Okay. Rav Yisai, get ready for this one. Rav Shimshon Shans quoted in Oitzer Agoinim to Chagiga on the 59. Oitzer Agoinim, by the way, was made by Lubavitcher. I don't know if you've heard of him. Binyamin Menashe Levin. You should know. There was a great god. He was from Babruisk. Binyamin Menashe Levin. He was a Lubavitcher. He became a shtickle Tziyoni and a shtickle modern. He always remained from, but he became also a little bit of a Ifkeklet. You can see pictures of him online. He's known as Levin. Beis Mem Levin. Binyamin Menashe Levin. He was the biggest god at the Amazon, the Chum of Goinim. He made Oitzer Agoinim. It's a fabulous work. Rabbi said that some Jews have good heads. I don't know how he did it, but the Goinim, which is the rabbis who lived in Iraq, in the ancient, in dark ages Iraq, we're talking about the Kufa, the 500-year period between 500 and 1000, after Chassidus Talmud, which ends at around 476, 500. So pretty much, we're talking about scattered little fragments from the Kairoganese, Shuvas Agoinim are scattered across the Yishurim. It's not organized, and he organized everything. The Mamish, according to Seder Shas, he was a Gaon Olam in the Tchum of mind upon Goinim. He was a Lubavitcher Chassid originally, and he always was a Lubavitcher Chassid, but he became a shtickle, Sioinish style. I could want him either way. He was a big genius. So the Maisa is, in Oitzer Agoinim to Chagiga on the 59, he has over there a bunch of tshuvas that are brought down regarding the pulmus about Agada. And then he quotes over there on page Amud Kuflam at Vav. Take a look what he says. This is the words of the Rashmi Shantz. The Echiyale Alev Ish Loimar. How could it even go up in your mind to say, Shalo Yikach Divrei HaAgoda Kipshota, not to accept the words of Agoda 100% in its literal form? Elo Vave Al Divrei Chacham Melohoisif Mehem Umehem Ein Ligroya Ein Lohoisif Umehem Ein Ligroya. The words of Chacham don't you even detract one bit from it. Kol Divreim Kedar Vonois Uchamas Smilos Letuim. Their words are like nails that are firmly stuck into the ground forever. Don't touch the Agodas Hashas. Right here, right down there, my friends, you have the symbol of Ashkenazi culture of the time and the symbol of Sephardic culture, the Rambam, head to head on each other in big battle. And I will understand why the rabbis of Ashkenaz had the following thing to say about Sefer Hamada of the Rambam. Now this is not, I'm not quoting now Ashmi Shantz, I'm quoting what the rabbis of France in the medieval period said about it, but there's no doubt in my mind that Ashmi Shantz would say the exact same thing. Keep the Sefer Hamada, in the first book of the Rambam, Sefer Hamada, which has some scientific stuff, Koyrim Minin the Kofrim, read heretics and Kofrim, the Divrei Chachomim the Agodas, who deny the words of Chachom and the Agodas Hashas, the Epikursen, and Apikursen, Chilkum Alaboisum, that argue on the rabbis. This, my friends, is all quoted, by the way, in a series of articles by Professor Avram Grossman called Kiddush Hashem, the Meir Sayyid Aleph Hayed Beis Bein Ashkenaz LaArtzis Islam Hayachas LaAgoda. The bulk of tonight's shiur you will not find there, but a lot of the around information you will find there. Now, my friends, this was the attitude of the Balei Teves to the Rambam. They were burning mad at him. Burning mad at the Rambam.
And they thought that every hour
there's going to be some more Geshmaka things you're going to see soon about that. But we'll get to that later on in the show, perhaps in the next year. Who could put down a watch in front of me so I should be able to keep track of the time? That's good, fine. Pretty good. Excellent, thank you, it's perfect. Now, YY, before I continue farther, we have to understand something. We are little people. My brain is not that big. And most of us don't have that big brains. We're talking over here about a battle to the Israel. I'm not here to decide who's right. Perhaps there was a spiritual I'm sure there was a spiritual meaning to the battle. I'm sure there's also a much deeper way to interpret the battle. But I'm not here to describe the philosophies. I'm here to tell you the facts the way they are and present the mitzvahs the way it is. Bottom line, both the Rambam and the Balei Teves are holy to us. Both of them mean a lot to us. Both of them are part of our lives. We learn Teves every day and we learn Rambam every day. And we live both of them. But historically, at the time, they were bari plukta. They were doing a battle, a very strong war against each other. Now, the Rambam doesn't come from a hollow space. The Rambam's approach to Avodas Hashas has a long-standing history in the Muslim world. Professor Avram Grossman asks a famous question, and that is, why do we find traditionally that every time every time it came to having Kiddush Hashem, we find that the Sephardim were much more makel. and they said that a person has the right to adopt externally Islam. And you might argue this, and the Rambam himself, by the way, was of the shita that you should accept Islam externally, abi to save your life. We know from sources of the Rambam's own time that the Rambam officially converted to Islam externally to protect his life and the life of his family, and the Rambam would even chant verses of the Quran to protect himself, because now, the Pashtus, the reason is because it has to do with the fact that Islam is not Avodah Zarah, Christianity is. That's the simple approach. That's what the Rambam Betzim writes in Maimer Kiddush Hashem. He writes the Fedish over there that a person does not have to let himself get killed because Torah values human life. Human life stands in the highest madrega, and a person has to understand that Islam is not Avodah Zarah. That's the number one approach as to why the difference between the rabbis of, the fact that in Christian countries Jews would always either let themselves get killed, or even stronger, they would actually take their own lives. Ad kedei. Sorry.
Rambam has a very extreme opinion on Christianity anyway.
The Rambam holds that it's total Avodah Zarah, 100%. But bottom line, they would take their own lives rather than convert to Christianity. Not only they would take their own lives, they would kill their kids. The Ashkenazi rabbis paskin, you're allowed to kill your kids, you're allowed to slaughter your own kids. They even speak about the concept of mothers killing their own children with knives and sacrificing them like korbanos. In the Ashkenazi poetry, some of which we recite, by the way, on Tisha B'Av, they clearly say that, wow, this is an incredible Kiddush Hashem, and they praise it. Tosfos in Masechet Avodah Zarah, by the way, writes clearly that it's a chiyuv and it's a mitzvah, and it's a great thing. Not it's a chiyuv, but it's a mitzvah, and it's a great thing for mothers and fathers to take the lives of their own children rather than have them convert to Christianity. This was the Bali Tosfos hardliner approach.
Is there talking about chiyuv? Could you say this like an obligation?
By the way, you should know that the Maharami Rottenberg in the Tshuva writes clearly that we're not supposed to ask any questions about what the Gedolei Yisrael did. They knew what they were doing, and when they killed their kids, you find descriptions, by the way, mamish descriptions in the Rishonim, literally inscriptions where they speak about the fact that they will not have mercy on their own children and that they're ready to sacrifice them. They even had a bracha, by the way, Birkas HaZevach. They would say the bracha al Shchita before they would slit the throats of their children. Wow. This was the world of Ashkenaz. The mass suicide. It was called Birkas HaZevach.
Was that
yes. We're going to give it. That's why I said this shiur needs to have either two parts, perhaps even three parts. This is at least a two-part shiur. Maybe it'll stretch into three, but at least two. We're not going to finish this tonight. I'm telling you this. This is a massive outlook on life, which the medieval Ashkenazic, that is French and German Jews, had. And it was a very, very, very powerful way of looking at things, which I don't know if we can live up to their standards today, but that's how they looked at it. I could read to you the poetry also where they actually praise this act. One poem was even recited to encourage people to do it. We recite this. It's called Piuta Okoi Vaneekad. Ironically, it became very popular in Yemen. And in Yemen, they would sing it with a beautiful chant. In Ashkenaz, we just read it. But it originally originates from Ashkenaz. It's written by Rabbi YY Regensburg. That's the famous Rabbi YY, from Smicha, who holds the Chaticha Nasas and the Veil, only by Basar Chol. That's him. He wrote a piyut. It's called Piyut HaOkoi Vaneka. We recite it, by the way, on Saint Gedalia, even in the Chabad ritual. And it speaks about basically a discussion between the father and son, where the son tells the father, basically, I'm ready to be slaughtered, and I'm ready to give you my neck. And cut, and don't have mercy, and don't be afraid. And basically, if you take a look, this was actually done in Worms in 1096, in Mainz in 1096, in Cologne, Germany in 1096, and all over the place there was mass suicide. The Goyim would come into the castles and they would find pools of blood. More in York later on, that was the next century over, but in York there was also mass suicide. The reality is that Jews were not afraid to do this. This is what they did. This was the Shita of Ashkenaz. It was a firm, straight-up Shita, a very powerful and firm Shita. And this was their Shita. Now, the question becomes, how come we don't find this in Sfar? Now, you might want to say that it's because Islam is not Christianity, it's not Avodah Zarah. That would be a good answer if that would only be the case in Islam. But the reality is that Sfar suffered a similar Gzeda to Ashkenaz a few years later. And that Gzeda was the Gzeda of Hei Kuf Nun Aleph, Gzedas Kane, which is the Gzedas, give me a second.
1391.
Gzedas Kane is the Gzedas that took place in 1391. And in the Gzedas Kane we find over there that many Jews, as a matter of fact the vast majority, converted to Christianity.
This is where?
And this is in Christian Spain, rather than die. Which means to say that we can't only just blame this on the fact that Islam is different from Christianity. We have to recognize...
This was in the half of Spain that became Christian.
This was in the northern part of Spain, but at that, by the time you hit 1391, majority of Spain is already becoming Christian.
Right, but those same Jews would have been sort of converting to Islam before that, no?
Those same Jews would have agreed to convert to Islam before to protect their lives, and then as soon as the Exeda is removed, go back to living as a Jew openly. Yes, that is true. But you have to understand that under Islam it can make sense. That you could say that the word is that they felt that, and rightfully so, that Islam was not Christianity. It's not true the Muslims hate Jews more than Christians, as the Rambam writes in the final Tshuva, printed in the back of Sefer Shoftim, that Muslims hate Jews much more than Christians. It's not true. But as far as the religion is concerned, Islam's Avodah Zarah is not Avodah Zarah. Christianity is Avodah Zarah. So indeed, you could and say it has to do with the fact that Islam is not Avodah Zarah, and Christianity is Avodah Zarah. But that's only if the only experience would have been when it came to Islam. But the fact is, even under Christianity, the vast majority of Jews in Spain accepted the option, which frankly, let's be honest, we would all do around the table, including myself most probably, and that is they accepted Christianity externally, they even kissed the cross, and then as soon as the Exeda was removed, they all went back to being good Jews. Which, let's be honest about it, that's what we would all do around the table. And the reality is they found all kinds of excuses up here, correct excuses. For example, they said there's a concept of being mishba, of swearing officially, paying lip service to Christianity, while in your heart, you mevatel believe it. Like you say, I pledge allegiance to Ashkenazic, whatever, and in your heart, you basically are mevatel beliboy. Or you could fake bow, like kivyochel bow slightly in a different direction. All the tricks that, let's be honest about it, all of us around the table would do, that's exactly what Spanish Jews did. What was the difference? This is a question that's been asked. B'nai Yisachar criticizes Spanish Jewry and says that they're responsible for learning too much secular philosophy, and it affected their Kiddush Hashem level. Let's be honest about it. We are also very much affected by the secular world around us. We like America. We like Thomas Jefferson. We like the chocolate and all the other. Yes, when I say you, I'm talking about myself. I don't know about you. I know about myself. I like the Western world. I enjoy the Western world, and that's why it's very hard for me to take a blade and start, our generation doesn't have to put up with it. The Abish didn't give our generation that insane because we don't need it. We have other understandings which perhaps our ancestors in France and Germany wouldn't stand by, like living with the internet, for example. I don't know how they would do with the internet. We're surviving the internet. Exactly. So you have to understand every generation has its misconceptions. Go ahead, yes.
Is that why some of the Jews started calling those other Jews who converted to Christianity Marranos? That means the name Marranos weren't given by the Christians, they were given by Jews to other Jews.
That I did not read. I read that it was given by the Christians.
But 100 years later, most of the same.
I read that it was given by other Christians.
Because Marranos means pig, right?
Yeah, Marranos means pig. It was not given by other Jews, but other Jews did put down those who accepted. For example, you find that the Mahari Beirav in the 1500s in Spas puts down Rabbi Levi ibn Chaviv, a fellow Sefardic Spanish rabbi, because Rabbi Levi ibn Chaviv did officially accept externally Christianity as a small boy to save his life. Mm-hmm. And he puts him down, he says, I wasn't like that, I wasn't that way. I stood up. Mm-hmm. And it was a big fight then about renewing smicha, about chidush smicha. Yeah, it was a big fight about renewing chidush smicha. And I believe Ibn Chaviv opposed, and Mahari Beirav was for. And it was a little shtech that was given over there from the Mahari Beirav to the Ibn Chaviv. So you see yourself, it wasn't considered praiseworthy, but the fact is that's what the majority of Spanish Jews did. Minus who? The family of the Rosh. The family of the Rosh were German Jews who came to Spain. They all killed themselves and their families in the same good old Ashkenaz tradition rather than accept Christianity. So we see clearly that the attitude of Ashkenaz was a firm one. And this was a question that many professors and scholars are asking why. The answer that is offered by Professor Avram Grossman, he has for it about literally a 12-part answer. He has 12 different answers, but one of the answers he focuses on is it happened because of the value of agodas. In the Ashkenazic world, in the world of the Balei Teves, agodas hashas were very, very powerful. And this was the debate. The debate was like this. The concept and the obligation. The Pella is not only on the fact that in Ashkenaz they usually chose to die, But the Pele is they killed their own kids. They killed themselves and their own kids. Where do they get that from? And the answer is the only Mekoidos you have for that are Agadic Mekoidos that come from Agada. You do not have any Mekoidos in Halacha for this concept. All of the Mekoidos you have for this concept come specifically from the Agada. For example, let me give you a couple of examples for that. One example would be the famous, give me a second, in Masechta Gittin, you have a story which is brought down in Gittin Daf Nun Zayin on the base. About 400 boys and girls came from Yerushalayim, and they realized they were being taken for znus, and they jumped out and jumped into the water, the girls, and then the boys jumped into the water, and they died rather than do an Aveda. And the same story is brought down in Eichar Rabbah, but over there it doesn't say in Parsha Aleph Piska Memches, but over there it says Sholish Snois Mikdeli Yerushalayim, from the great people of Yerushalayim, so it strengthens the story even more. Also, you have all the stories in the Medrash and Medrash Eichar and other sources that speak about the Kohanim jumping into the fire during the Churban rather than stay alive and watch the Churban happen. Shechayda is not even a bigger pella. No one's even asking them to do an Aveda. Just asking, what's the use of to stay alive? And yet they felt the pain so much of Chas v'sholom even looking and even having a suffix in the emes of the Eibush, because after the Beis HaMikdash would be gone, it would immediately be a very strong suffix by them about Chas v'sholom what happened. And so to them it was such a mufrichtige concept. It was so negated. Even the Chas v'sholom had a sveka that they were ready to jump in. That's it. Jump into the fire. Finished. Over and out. That was their attitude.
How many Jews did that?
And we don't know. We don't have numbers, but many. Believe it or not, Sefer Yosifon, the writings of Josephus, were also given a lot of power in Ashkenaz. We know that Rabbi YY Geisinsky himself had copies of Sefer Yosifon. Over there, it speaks about the story of Matzada, and it speaks about the fact that they were ready to fight to the death. The Girsa about the Goyim was that they committed suicide. That's not the Girsa about Yidden. By Yidden, the Girsa is they fought to the death. But if you take a look over there, they could have saved themselves. They could have surrendered and lived a happy life. Instead, they fought to the death, to the last man. Why is that? That is because, once again, Chachmei Ashkenaz felt that even though it's not mentioned clearly in Halacha, but they felt that in the Gemara, the right attitude was that a person should be ready to die al Kiddush Hashem and even take his own life and the life of his children rather than have a suffix in Emunah, rather than have a doubt in Emunah. Another example for that is Chana L'Shivas Bonel, which had a very big effect. Or the Gemara's gear says Isha Achas L'Shivas Bonel. The Sefer Yosifon changes the gears of the Chana. That became the popular gears we have today. But Isha L'Shivas Bonel, and it says that after they all agreed to die, she committed suicide. And she jumped off the roof and she died. And it says afterwards, a Baskal came out and said, Eim Habonim Smecha, the mother of the sons is happy. So, Agodes Hashas, if you tell the Rambam all these stories, you know what the Rambam will tell you. Agodes Hashas means zero. Do not bring me any chachas from it, don't bring any proof from it.
Does it deny the veracity of the story? Or
this is not something that we base our canon of halacha on at all. This is not what we base our canon of halacha on. We do not establish in the maiden with Divrei Agoda, period, and the story over and out.
Is he objecting to the veracity of the story, or whether or not to learn out from the story a lesson for us?
The Rambam,
like whether the story actually occurred, or whether we could derive a lesson from the story.
That's a very, very good question. The Rambam is objecting to the following points. One, in the Rambam's world, Lav Dafke every Agoda actually happened. The Rambam did not accept that every Agoda for sure happened. The Ramban, who was also Sefardic, had the same attitude, by the way. The Ramban says himself clearly, I do not necessarily accept every Agoda as correct. That's first of all. Second of all, even if, Lav Dafke happened with the Ramban writes clearly, it's possible that Agodas are able to be completely not true. You can have Agodas that are false. If you let me go through the Mahalach Shiur, you'll get a lot more information. I'm cruising through it slowly but surely. I'm getting through the facts. But the second point is that the Rambam felt that even if it did happen, Lav Dafka we could paskin that way. That was the Rambam's Shita. Now the Rambam's Shita did not come from nowhere. The Rambam's Shita has basis in tradition of Judaism in the Sephardic world. Now, before that, I want to point out that it's not so poshut to just knock the Shita of the Rambam completely, because at the end of the day, there is quite a lot of basis for the derech of the Rambam, and we cannot completely knock the Rambam's Shita. Let me quote to you a little bit of a major source that actually supports the words of the Rambam and the Sephardic attitude very, very strongly. And that is, if you take a look at the statement in the Yerushalmi that says as follows. There's a statement in the Talmud Yerushalmi that says, a minute. One second, I'm trying to find this point. There's a statement of Talmud Yerushalmi in Peo that says the following point. It says like this, Yerushalmi Peo, that's Ha'orah 2. Take a look, that's Ha'orah 2. Yerushalmi Peo, Beis Hey. It says in the Talmud Yerushalmi over there the following lashon. Ein lemedim loy min ha'halachos v'loy min ha'agodos or min ha'hagodos. You're not allowed to learn out of halachos that were just given over, and you're not allowed that are not well established, and not from any of the stories. The loy min ha'teisofos, and not from additions that were added by private students. Elo min ha'talmud. You're only allowed to learn out halacha from the actual clear, established Gemara. This supports the Rambam 1000%. The problem is that is not the statement that we find in the Gemara Bavli. That's the statement we find in the Gemara Yerushalmi. But in the Gemara Bavli, it actually says fakert. If you take a look at the Gemara Bavli, it says clearly the following lashon. In the very same Medrash Kehelas Rabba, as well as in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it says Mikra, Mishnah, Halacha, Talmud, Toisophois, ve'agodos. Mamish, everything that the Yerushalmi was clearly knocking. Mikra, okay, that nobody was knocking, that's the Tanakh itself. Mishnah, nobody was knocking. Halachos, and Halacha, Talmud, Toisophois, ve'agodos. Va'afilu, ma shetalmud vosik, osid limol fnei rabbi, anything that a student in the future might say in front of his teacher, kulam, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. They are all a halacha given over to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, which means to say that these things are established, and we're not allowed to argue with them. Chas v'sholom, we have to accept them 100%. We have to accept them 100%. We're not allowed to chas v'sholom argue with them, right? That's another statement that was written. Give me just a second. Yeah, so therefore, because that is the case, that everything was given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, so you are not allowed to mess around, chas v'sholom, with the statements of the of Agodes Hashas. You're not allowed to. So we see that in the Yerushalmi itself, there are different approaches that are given. Different approaches that are given. So, bottom line, we see clearly that it's not exactly a clear-cut story. There are different approaches that are given, which, by the way, there's a very, how are you takemachriya? How are you supposed to fit in these two approaches in the Talmud Yerushalmi itself? On one hand, it says you don't learn anything out from the Agolis, and on the other hand, it says in Kehelas Rabba, and it says in as well as in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it says clearly that everything was given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, even Mikra, Mishnah, Halacha, Agoda. Same thing you have, for example, in Yalkut Shimoni al Torah. You have in Yalkut Shimoni al Torah as well. Yalkut Shimoni, it's Yalkut Shimoni, Tov Hei Aleph. Tov Hei Aleph. If you take a look over there, it says also that everything in the Agoda was given clearly to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. So how do you reconcile these approaches? So actually, if you take a look weiter in Ha'orah 2, in the Maharatz Chayes, Tzvi Hirsch Chayes, who was a great rabbi, who lived about 300 years ago, in Darchei Yero Chelek Sheni, he brings down clearly that it depends which type of Agoda. That's how he wants to learn. It depends which type of Agoda. If you're talking about Agoda, which is located in Talmud Yerushalmi, Agoda, which is located in Talmud Yerushalmi, lav dafka so accurate, because the Talmud Yerushalmi's Girsois are sometimes blurry. But if you're talking about an Agoda which is mentioned in the Talmud Bavli, over there it's going to be 100%. Agoda mentioned in the Talmud Bavli is 100% established, you're not allowed to mess around with. By the way, this itself is not 100%. Many times you find that the Rishonim establish halachas from Ashkenaz when it comes to halachas from the Talmud Bavli as well. Many, many times you find that. So it's not exactly a clear-cut path. But nevertheless, what he wants to be machriya is that, why the difference? Because Talmud Yerushalmi was not as studied as Talmud Bavli. At least the bottom line, halacha is not like it 100% necessarily. Because Talmud Bavli is basro, they are later. And the halacha is like the later opinion versus the earlier opinion. And therefore, being that there's quite a few times that the halacha is not established like Talmud Yerushalmi, so therefore, the Talmud, because the Girsois are a little bit more messed up, are not as clear cut. And the Girsois of the Bavli are much more clear cut. And that is why the Maharatz Chayes wants to offer achra between the two approaches and say that when it comes to the inyan of Talmud Bavli over there, you can base halachas even on the Agodas. You can base halachas even on the tales of the Gemara. But when it comes to Talmud Yerushalmi, over there, being that the Gersois are a little bit not so clear, so over there, you have to make sure to be more cautious when you paskin halacha. This is the achra that the Maharatz Chayes wants to bring down. The bottom line, this achra itself is not set in stone. And there is many, many cases where you befedish have halachas being derived from Talmud Bavli as well as Talmud Yerushalmi. As we're going to see throughout the different amount of claims that I gave over here, it's not a clear-cut point. Now, the Rambam's approach has a support in the Gemara Yerushalmi, but the Ashkenaz approach also has a clear yesod. There are ancient quotes from the Talmud Yerushalmi from the Medrash that support both perspectives. However, it should be noted that each side took its approach 100% and 100% firmly, and refused to negotiate with the other side. It was a very clear-cut approach. It's important to note that the Rambam himself was heavily influenced by the Go'inim of Bavel. That is because the Go'inim of Bavel lived in a Islamic world, the same world that the Rambam lived in. The Go'inim of Bavel also clearly had access to the writings of philosophy of the Greeks. That's because when the Muslim world in the 7th century conquered Alexandria, they found a huge library full of writings of Aristotle and Plato and all the other Greek philosophers, and they made use of all of these writings, and they translated them into Arabic. And the Muslim world was studying extensively philosophy. The Goïnei Bavel saw the philosophy of the Greeks, which they got through a keli of Arabic. They didn't get it from the Greek original, but they got it through a vessel of Arabic. And so they did also have took into consideration what's called the rationalist movement. And being that Agodas Hashas contradict the, so to speak, rationalist movement, all the Jews who lived in Arabic countries that were heavily involved in the study of philosophy automatically made concessions towards the philosophy by adopting certain approaches that seemed more rationalist. And therefore they would knock very, very often the inyonim of Agoda. In Ashkenaz, philosophy was a Talmudic word. And secular subjects was treif and chazan treif. I shouldn't say that word. But where it was considered treif 100%, and there was no even right to look at it, chas v'shalom. You'll never find an Rashi quoting Aristotle. You'll never find a Talmud quoting Plato. It's not going to happen in 1,000 years. And therefore, because of that, it was a very, very strong approach to fight philosophy as much as possible. To clarify that matter, I'm going to quote to you two sources that bring out this point. One is the Vilna Gaon, who himself was a tremendous fan of the Rambam. The Vilna Gaon himself quotes the Rambam many times. He would organize a Seder Cairo according to the Rambam. Right? We all know that the Vilna Gaon's Cairo only had 2 matzahs, not 3 matzahs, because according to Shittas Rambam, you're only supposed to have 2 matzahs. And so the Vilna Gaon followed the Rambam in many, many, many ways and had a lot of respect for the Rambam. The Vilna Gaon wrote so much on the Rambam, not to the fact that they made a full commentary on the Rambam. In today's Rambams, they print the Hagoyos of the Vilna Gaon, which that's how much he wrote on the Rambam. He wrote on a very, very extensive amount. In Yoyda Deus, in Mekuf Ayin Tesef Cotton Yud Gimel, the Rambam, it's quoted from the Rambam that Kishuf is all above Maisa. Kishuf has no real power. And the Rambam knocks Ayin Hora, Kishuf, anything mystical that has to do with evil spirit. The Rambam says all psychological problems in a person's head. It has no real bearing.
When the pasuk says magic,
the Vilna Gaon, it's all an effect a psychological effect on a person, that a person gets affected psychologically
Gnosis.
by the concept of you know.
In the Torah, it mentions magic.
That's right. So we'll tell you that's all hypnosis. That's all hypnosis. Basically, you're being hypnotized to believe that something's happened, but it's not actually happening. Basically, this made the girl very angry. And I'm sorry.
I can see that the story with Shaul and Balas.
That's right. The story of Shalom Baal, who, according to the medrash of the mother of Avner, correct. Yes, 100%. There's a lot of questions on
just
this.
an illusion.
And by the way, because this was such a controversial statement, take a look at the Guru, who has ultimate respect for the Rambam. Look what he writes. Chochmas hapu. This is Simon Kuf Ayin Tes, if Cotton Yid Gimel. He says, Chochmas hapilosofia ho'arura hit o'isai. The cursed wisdom of philosophy has made the Rambam stray. That is what he says. Yes, that is what he writes. No question about it. The Guru makes it very clear. This did not stop the Guru from studying the Rambam all his life, and from writing Hagoyis and Delusion of the Rambam, and from dwelling in the Rambam. The Guru loved the Rambam very much. But bottom line, the Guru felt that the Rambam's words when it comes to these inyanim are not to be accepted 100%, because the Guru felt that the Rambam's shittim when it comes to these things had a philosophical influence on it. Similar words are said by somebody who predates the Guru, known as the Maharshal. Now, the Maharshal I had to find from an old-fashioned print on Hebrew books that has crackly letters, but I'm going to read to you the words of the Maharshal that has a lot of cynicism to it. I always said this is a two-part shiur, by the way. Bear in mind, it's a two-part shiur. And we're going to have to finish up soon because it's getting a little bit late. Ah, that's a very big... Yeah. Did I address it? I'll get to that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We have about another 10 minutes left.
Where did you write about Chachmas Philosophy after? Where's it found?
I said before the Malbach.
Sorry, which one is it?
Which one on the page?
This I didn't put on the page. The Malbachim is Gro Yeredeos and Kufa Intessive Cotton Yedimel. Gro Yeredeos and Kufa Intessive Cotton Yedimel. Now, the Rambam wrote the words Shah Pilosofio Ha'arura Hit Osoi. But the Matpisei Vilna were scared, so they took out from the print the word Arura. But if you look in the Ksav Yad, it says Ha'arura Hit Osoi. That's what it is. Now, the Maharshal has a very, very interesting Hakdama thing to Baba Kama, where you feel in his writing the anger of Ashkenaz against Sfard. You feel how he is burning mad at Sephardic Jewry. And he's not only mad at them, he's angry at them in a personal way. And it comes out with a lot of pain in his writing. He takes on three Sephardic Jews. One is the Rambam, one is the Ibn Ezra, and one is the Beis Yosef. Now, what he says in the Beis Yosef, I'm not going to get into.
You don't know the Maharshal.
But the Maharshal was...
He was often a pressure like Shammai.
Yeah. The Maharshal was like Shammai, 100%. The Maharshal was like Shammai. But the Maharshal here is fighting a personal war. He considered himself true heir to Rashi because his name is Luria. He originated from the Loire in France. And he descended from a starke Ashkenaz family that goes all the way back to Rashi. He's the most famous descendant of Rashi. Even the Chidah, a Sephardic rabbi, writes on him that he's from Tzetzoy Rashi. So he felt that he's the true representation of the derech of the Bali Teves. That's why he wrote an entire sefer slugging up the Ibn Ezra on Chumash and defending Rashi, called Yiriyos Shloimoi. The Maharshal didn't only have feelings in his heart; he put them to action. Let me read to you a little bit of Akdama the Maharshal, and you will understand a little bit the pain and anger that Chachmei Ashkenaz had in the Sephardic world because of their attitudes and their philosophy, and that they felt that that's why the Sephardim didn't have that Kiddush Hashem power that the Ashkenaz had. They were very angry. They felt that it came because they were too influenced by secular study. I want to tell you today that, frankly, I don't relate to what Chachmei Ashkenaz did. I cannot see a father taking a blade and cutting the throat of his son. I just can't see it happening. I understand, but I can't see it. But I can't.
Gibzuch jetzt a Kuckuck was geht for in the hospital across the
That's something else.
and there was glyphosate via just
I understand.
Doesn't
I'm
that's
trying to explain to you that practically speaking, I can relate to it. Listen, I'm being honest with you. I just don't see how a person of the Western world. What's so ironic is that when we think of Ashkenaz today, we think of Western Jewry. And it's Pont Farket in the medieval period, the rationalists were the Sephardim. The Ashkenazim were the all the way. But it was a different kind of version. It wasn't an Arabic version of it. It was like it was a medieval Franco-German version of it. But nevertheless, this was their attitude. Let me read to you the words of the Marshal, so you should get a little bit of a feeling of what's going on. And listen carefully. The Marshal is not speaking for himself. The Marshal is voicing the pain of Ashkenazic Jewry in its anger on medieval Sephardic
in the
Jewry.
1500s.
Take a look. Marshal is the 1500s, but Marshal is a descendant of Rashi. And take a look at what's going on over here. Now, it's a pity I couldn't make a printout of Marshal, but listen carefully. It's very easy to find. Take a Yamshel Shlema, open up. He loved this Hakdama so much, he decided to print it twice. Once in the Hakdama of Baba Kama, and once in the Hakdama of Chulin. Twice he printed it, because he loved it so much. It was his own thing. Let me get to this. He says like this. It's so hard to read English there. I'm looking at crackly letters. Okay. Ulu Mosoi, and following countering the Sephardi, Boruch Yomer Sephardi, blessed will say the Sephardi. Le'olam tzadku divrei amechabrim im hu min Sephardi. If a Sephardi rabbi writes a book, he must be right. He must be 100% right. There's no question about it. Ubifrat divrei Rambam, especially the Rambam. Asher shehoyo me'ula, that was so great, the whole malos, with all the great malos, the pnimius, the chitzonius, inside and out, the whole chachmei atzorfatim, and all the medieval Franco-German rabbis, he klippes hashum negdei, are like a peel of garlic compared to him. This is what the Sephardim say, says the Marshal. V'shori limore, may Hashem forgive the Rambam. Shegor mosehu, he's the one who caused all this trouble. The goyim dilehu. This is his direct effect. Im kenhu, if it's correct, mashalimsa bi'igrosei, what's found in his letter, biksav, and ksav shekosav vidnoi, that he wrote to his son, v'gozarolov, and he commanded upon him, lumoit sifri achocham Rabbi Avraham Even Ezra, to learn the books of the wise man, Rabbi Avraham Even Ezra, ashaloi hoyo ba'al Talmuda. That wasn't the proper Talmud Chacham in the Tchum of Gemara. He might have known, he knew something, he knew science, and he knew philosophy, and he knew Mikra, and he knew Diktuk, but he didn't know Gemara. That's what the Marshal is saying. Many would argue, but V'roiv bin Yonei Perushoi, and most of the structure of his thinking and his commentaries, al derech. Now, I might be making mistakes because this is the kind of letters I have to read from, but it has been reprinted with clear, beautiful letters in the new versions of Yamshel Shlem. It's only a pity before I came here I was not able to find one in the Hadara Torah library. So you'll have to forgive me. We're gonna make do, but I guarantee you, even if I make a mistake or two, it's only 1 or 2 mistakes. I'm reading pretty much 99.9% correct. I believe the word is al derech hatchuna. I think he says hatchuna. Based on astronomy, v'ativ'i, and science, the Kabbalah's chitzonos, and external exceptions. V'hitris b'kama b'koimos, and in quite a few places, he spoke out with audaciousness, neged divrei chachmei ha-Torah v'ha-Talmud, against the words of the Torah and the Talmud, oimi bli hashgacha, oimi bli yediyah, or because he didn't care, he didn't realize. I think hashgacha, if I'm going to judge these words in a more strict way, I'm going to say it means he didn't care, but I don't have to necessarily interpret the Marshal's words that way. I can say bli hashgacha means he didn't realize. I'll give it the more lenient shot. Oimi bli hashgacha, oimi bli yediyah. Or without realizing, or without knowing. The problem is, what does it mean without knowing? That's why it sounds more like he couldn't care less. His honor is placed in its proper place. He was a great chacham, the aim meshivin asadi. You cannot send away the lion. He was wise, but he didn't know how to learn Gemara. And because he did not even know how to learn Gemara, that's wrong, but this is what's right, according to Marshal. He didn't know Gemara, he didn't have knowledge of Shas. You don't follow Rabbi Avraham ben Ezra's commentaries. Loi l'chiyuv leila p'tur, loi l'esev leila hatir. Not to be mechayev, not to say potter, not to aser, and not to be matir. Ki osa kama pa'omim neged ha'halocha. He did many times against the halacha. Afilu neged chachmei ha-mishnah. Even against the rabbis in the Mishnah, the neged ha-miroi ha-Talmud bli nismor. And against the rabbis of the Gemara without an end. The emes shamati yoimim olav. And the truth is that I taka heard shekach hayam achriya v'hayam idea l'rabim. He would taka tilt the scale in that direction, and let the public know he doesn't want to bend his face before anybody. But to explain things until where his intellect reaches, not even without looking at the Kabbalah, without looking at the tradition of the rabbis. As he alone has in many places, in quite a few places in his commentary in the Torah, Lulei Kabbalah, despite that, without the tradition of Chazal, Lulei means without, like if not without, but if not, Lulei, if not HaKabbalah, for the tradition. You see, I would say, nevertheless, his words are not correct in my eyes. I don't agree with this path of making Perushim and not looking at Kabbalah's Chazal. I'm sorry, I don't agree with this, he says. Well, if he daiti, and according to my opinion, says the Marshal Shekfar, Nosan Olovas Hadim, that he already paid for it. Ki Nosan Yod Laminim Velatzdukim, the Evan Ezra has given room for support for Apikursim, Tzdukim, and people who have a lack of Emunah and Hashem. Ani HaGever, I the man, Ashero Oni Amway, that has seen the suffering of his people. And even though after all these things that Avraham ben Ezra did, which gave support to Kfirah, after all this that Rambam goes and praises him, and he gives him the crown, I would still be quiet. The Rambam also went a little bit in his ways. He also went in these ways of Avraham ben Ezra a little bit, he says. Notice that he's less critical of the Rambam than he is of Avraham ben Ezra, but he's still critical. He says, he went a little bit in his ways, in the ways of the wisdom of the philosophers and their riddles. And he thought, or v'sovru, they thought, that Avraham ben Ezra and the Rambam, and I'm probably missing a few, either a word or a few letters here, but they thought that with this chokhmah, or ya'alu, could be ya'alu, but you have to look up the makar, that with this chokhmah they will elevate themselves to the ultimate soul experience. Halavai, he says cynically, halavai shati aliyah zu aliyah v'sulei midei. Let's hope that this is only going up and not going down. But it's not enough for the Rambam of this. It's not enough that he's busy, he goes in the ways of Avraham ben Ezra, and he studies secular subjects, and he praises Avraham ben Ezra, who gave support to Kofrim, Minim, and Apikursim. It's not enough! El Shegina, Chachmei Hatzarfotim, he makes fun of the medieval Ashkenazi rabbis. Well, Omar, and he said, Shalahirolohim, Shemakirim al-Boyre, that they don't recognize God, Elamitech Achilas Boser Sholuk, Metubal B'chaymetz B'shumin, that they don't recognize God unless they eat. They're so coarse and physical and so removed from philosophical thinking that they can't understand God unless they eat a steak that is soaked in vinegar with garlic.
What did the Rambam say?
And there's a lotion like of the Rambam like that. The sharpest lashonos of the Rambam are found in his correspondences with the rabbis of Montpellier. The rabbi, Chachmei Narvoino, with the rabbis of Narvoino, the rabbis of Montpellier, the rabbis of the south of France, who used to write. They used to write to the Rambam. You see, the Ashkenaz rabbis didn't want to write to the Rambam. He was totally puzzled by them. But the rabbis of the south of France, they were ready to write to the Rambam and negotiate with him. And basically, the Rambam would respond to them, and he would say a lot of interesting things about the rabbis who came. There's another expression from the Rambam, another Sefardic Scholars, where he says that the rabbis of northern France and Germany live in cold countries, and that is why their brains are frozen. Wow. But either way, the Isa is, as you can see, my friends, in the words of Marshall, and he goes on, and he goes on, and he goes on. I only read part of that, but that goes on page after page.
So we're interested
and
we want to hear the ones from Ashkenaz back.
I just gave you that. I just gave you a little bit.
More.
More. So I want to be the one second.
And then they want to say Ashkenaz enough spice.
It's okay, the Ashkenazim, they wanted to write, they knew how to write very nicely. But I go on either way, as you can see. There's some more, I'll give you some more soon, but I go on either way, the bottom line is that the attitudes were very, very sharp. This led to a big mistake, and that was the public burning of the Rambam in France. Now, believe it or not, this might come as a shocker to you, but actually French rabbis were more, within Ashkenaz, you had the French and the German, The French were more kanos even than the German. The German Jews, despite the fact they were very upset at the Rambam as well, but they never made a public burning of the Rambam. There was a public burning that was done of the Rambam during the 1200s that took place in the center of the city of Paris, not far from the Notre Dame, which was a massive cathedral. And they burnt the Rambam, they literally set the Rambam in flames. Not the halachas for him, but the Sefer Amado and the Moed Nevuchim. Classic. The ones that had, the rest they left. The Sefer Amado and the Moed Nevuchim. Kfirah, Kofra. And I always said this was exciting. Yeah,
Not too long after the burning of the Gemara.
They do. That's right. A very short time after this was the Shemayim they were punished. Because, and by the way, it should be noted that in this burning did not participate any of the Gedolei Tzarfas. The Gedolei Tzarfas were very upset at the Rambam, but they had a Cold War Shita. The Shita was boycotted. That's why it doesn't show up in Chalal and Bali Atayis command. They boycotted him. The Rosh takes a very interesting attitude to the Rambam. In Shuvas Rosh Bechlal, Klal Chof Siman Chof, okay? You can hear very, very nicely what he thinks about the Sephardic tradition. He makes it very clear beyond the shadow of a doubt. The words ring in my mind because I read them so many times as a kid, because the first time I saw it, I almost fainted. And therefore, and what was even more shocking to me is that the Beis Yosef quotes it in the Simonei Dogim, Vachagovim. The Beis Yosef quotes it in Shulchan Aruch with Apshitis. That's it, and he doesn't even try to refute it. Someone came to the Rosh and pointed out to the Rosh in Klal Chof Siman Chof that some of the Sephardim, not all of them by the way, it was a minority amongst the Sephardim, but that some Sephardim were eating a bird called the ciguinia, which in Spanish basically means the stork, the chasido. The chasido. And they were saying that this is a kosher bird. And the Rosh was saying, da, ki ba'artzeinu ba'Ashkenaz in our land in Germany, he calls Germany our land. In our land, we never ate this. We never ate Rosh. Yeah, that's right, he was. We don't eat this stuff. And he says, well, these people that eat it and they say they have a Messias, says the Rosh, and I quote verbatim, Klal Chof Siman Chof, Shuvas Rosh, Klal Chof Siman Chof, V'da, ki ani lo yoisi oiche al pi shalahem, and know that I would not eat from them. Ki ani machazik ha-Messias shalom, because I hold up our tradition. Our fathers, the rabbis of Ashkenaz, the Torah was a tradition to them, passed down from the days of the Churban Abayis. And so too the Kabbalah of our fathers, our teachers in France, more than the Kabbalah of the Spanish Jews. And then he goes on to say, he finishes off. And this that we say, Oif Tohir Nechel B'Mesayis, that Oif Tohir is allowed to be eaten in the tradition, so they have a tradition. Hainu, Loi B'Mesayis HaPchusa. Different gears say either Mimen or Meiton. But Loi B'Mesayis HaPchusa Meiton, or Mimen. Not by a Mesayis which is lowlier than us. He doesn't say Hamu'ot Mimen, HaPchusa Mimen. Now you see very clearly how the Rosh felt about the attitude of the Sephardim. The Rosh also writes in his Chuvas and the Marshal quotes it here that Kabbalah b'yadeinu, a tradition is in our hands. Riv Rabbeinu Tam Tzorfatim, that Rabbeinu Yitzchok of Dan Per and Rabbeinu Tam, the two greatest Balei HaTosfos, Gedolim min Rambam b'chochmo v'minyan, are greater than the Rambam in wisdom and an amount of students, and therefore we have to follow them and not the Rambam. Then there's one more Fefer de Ketshuvah, which is found in the Rosh, and I do not remember by heart, but you can easily track it down by opening Shuvas Rosh. It's not that difficult to find. Open up the new Mochen Yerushalayim version. I don't remember the actual Mochen, but you can open up Shuvas Rosh. It's right there. Not a big deal. And the Rosh, we're going to have to conclude with this. And obviously, like I told you in advance, this is going to be a two-part series. However, next year, because we gave the historic background, similar to the Shiur on Yoshke, we gave the historic background. The next year, we actually got more to business. So keep your papers, or give it back to me and I'll keep it for you. It's okay, whatever you feel more comfortable. And then next year, but before you go, I want to finish with the Rosh. But next year, I'm going to focus on business. I have over here a lot of Hanamah and the other I want to go through. And that will be next year. I'm going to try not to stretch out the Shiur to a 3-part, because that's a little too much. 2 will suffice. So next week, I'm going to mention the Rebbe's edition next week as well, on a few things, yes. But I want to finish off with an interesting Rosh. I think it was important for me to talk about this because I wanted to give you guys the background of what was going on. This wasn't a cozy relationship that took place between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim in the medieval period. It was a very, very confrontational one. They weren't exactly best of friends constantly. There was a lot of fighting. By the way, the roots of that, because you had here a group of people that were living in a medieval Christian world that were ready to die and kill their own kids. And they saw everything as gvura. You have to accept every word of Agodas Chazal. Don't you dare deny one word, or I'll call you a kaifer! And they're and they were ready to fight. Like, And then on the other hand, you had these guys that were studying secular philosophy, and they were, open to hearing ideas of the Greeks, and they were very open, much more open-minded. They were more pacifist. They were looking to make everything. Also, think of the difference of the world. The Ashkenazim lived in a cold world of castles and knights and armor and dark and black and ghettos and Ashkenazim. By the way, they also lived in an isolated world. They were totally isolated. They lived in ghettos. They had to wear funny hats, tall, ugly hats. They had to wear pointy hats and all that. And they had to, the Alter brings down Shulchan, we know that Alter brings it down in Shulchan Aruch. The Alter brings down Shulchan Aruch about the Ashkenazic badge. During the medieval period, they had to wear a badge, not a Magen David. They had to wear a yellow circle.
He brings it on Shabbos.
He brings it on Shabbos. He writes the word Yorek, but it's not Yorek. It's actually, Yorek means yellow. It doesn't mean green. It was a yellow circle, and that was a symbol you were a Jew. Where do you think the Nazis got it from? They went back to the medieval period. They just added the Magen David. But they had to wear pointy hats to look like witches, because the Goyim called them witches, and magicians, and dark magic, and they had to wear long capes. Okay, long capes that everybody wore in the medieval period, but they had to wear pointy, ugly hats of like devils, and they had to wear circles, badges. They had to walk around. They lived in a ghetto. The world they lived in was not exactly sunshine USA. It was a very miserable, cold, dark, ugly world. And on the other hand, you had the Sephardim that were living around the Mediterranean with the sunshine. And so what happens is you see the difference of attitude. And you see the difference of attitude. You also see another Nakuda, by the way. The Sephardim were much more just to summarize the Gemara and write the Halacha. And the Ashkenazim were faultful the whole time. Gevura and Chesed. That is, by the way, the Chagav. In the Kodesh of Kabbalah, it's brought down Ashkenazim, Shloshim, and Chesed, the Sephardim, Shloshim, and Gvura. You have from the Mabit about that. One of the great Italian, the Yosef Mitrani, you have one of the great Sephardic Gedolim, he actually brings that down. The whole thing, he's actually Italian in his background. But he brings down this concept that Ashkenazim, Shloshim, and Gvura, and it's based on the Arizal, and Sephardim, Shloshim is from Chesed. But at the point, you see this clash that happened. But we'll get to that in a different occasion. I just want to finish off with the Rosh. And the Rosh basically said, and next week we'll have the final share on this matter. The Rosh writes, there was a very, 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 I would say, shtecherik tshuva that was written to the Rosh by a certain Rabbi Yisroel, who told of Toledo, that told the Rosh that the Rosh doesn't have the right to paskin about the takonos of the communities in Spain. Why not? Because he told, now the Rosh was a refugee. He ran away from Germany and settled in Spain. He never got along with the community. He was always struggling with his local community. He got along with them. They respected him very much, but he was always not happy with the situation in Spain. He constantly criticizes it throughout his children and says how miserable the derech halimud is. They don't really know how to learn here, whatever. He goes on and on and on about that. But, I'm sorry. But the bottom line is that this Rabbi Yisrael told the Rosh that you're a great rabbi, you know a lot of Gemara, but you don't have a right to paskin about our takonos. Why? For several reasons. First of all, he says our takonos are written in Arabic. You are an immigrant. Now you speak street Arabic, which you picked up while moving to Spain, which at the time was largely controlled by Muslims. But you don't speak classical Arabic. You don't speak literature Arabic. To understand our takonos, you have to speak literary Arabic. And you don't know literary Arabic. That's first of all. Second of all, us Sephardic Jews, we're not like you basically. We study philosophy, so to understand our takonos, you must have a philosophical background. You can imagine that Rosh didn't take a very strong liking to this kind of comments. He writes back to him, and he tells him like this. First of all, when you get to your Maisa with Arabic, you don't need to know too much fancy Arabic to figure out the takonos. First of all, he tells them basic knowledge of Arabic, and you can figure out the takonos. We're not just reading poetry or reading takonos. I can figure out what the takonos mean. It's okay. I'll work it out. Don't worry about it. I'll figure out what it means. I don't know if he mentions it or not, but you can also have it translated for that matter. So, but whatever. So he knocks that time out, and basically tells him basic Arabic is enough. Like, I don't even know very fancy Arabic in order to figure out what your takonos mean. And then he says, but again to the Chachmas Chetzenis, he says, Baruch Hashem, the Shechanani that gave me das, kechol chachmei Sfard hanimtzoyim. Just as much as any of the Sephardic rabbis. Afal pi de loyadaina, and I'm probably misquoting, but I'm giving you most of the quote, but you can look it up for the exact quote. De loyadaina mi chachmas chetzenis shalachem, brich rachamon the sheis von minei. Even though I don't know from your chachmas chetzenis, blessed be God that protects us from it. And then he goes on to tell him something unbelievable. He says, chachmas chetzenis is not a mile, it's a chison. And then he says something unbelievable. Unbelievable. You think it's a mashpia in yeshiva, Teves women. The Rosh says something unbelievable. He says that Chochmas Chetzenis is all about Gashmis and Gashmistic thinking. It trains a person to trust Chomer and to base everything on Chomer. Everything on materialism. Everything is built around materialism. How is somebody that has that attitude able to ever come to a matzav where he can later read the Torah, which is all based on Chochmas HaLeikus? It's all based on Getlichkeit. I read the Torah and relate to the miracles in the Torah, relate to the supernatural experiences of the Torah. He'll never be able to accept Nevuah. He'll never be able to accept Nisim because he's limited to a Gashmistic way of thinking, because philosophy trains you to think Bechumrius, and the Torah is trying to train you to think Belikus, Beruchni, and Ruchni and Gashmi are still one to the other. And therefore he says one who studies Chachmas Chetzenis will never be able to properly understand Chachmas HaTorah, as he sagt in the Rosh. This is a synopsis of what goes on over there. There was one tchum that Ashkenazim were the open-minded ones and Sephardim were not. Take a guess what that is. Women. Ashkenazim are the ones who banned marrying two women, and Ashkenazim are the ones who banned hitting women. You probably know that the Rambam paskins clearly in his writings, in Hilchos Ishus, the Rambam writes not that you should hit a woman, but the Rambam writes that if a woman tells her husband, if she says to her husband that I'm going to continue eating from your parnasa, and I believe it's Perek Tesvav Hilchos Ishus, but we have to check it out. My phone's up, it's frozen here, so I can't get to it. Or maybe I could get to it. But maybe I could get to it actually. Let me try to get to it, and this will be the last thing, the very last thing. Give me a second. Oh, very nice. That's nice. That's nice of you. Thank you.
We respect them.
Here. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That was smart of you. How did you find that? I was resourceful. Very resourceful. Very resourceful, by the way. So I know it's Ishus, that much I know, and I believe it's Perek Tesvav, but it should be very easy to find Zagor, the Ravid over there. So if it's not Perek Tesvav, then it must be in the Chavs. Then it must be in the Chavs. Give me a second, please. Yes, I found it, in the Chav Aleph. It's Perek Chav Aleph, and it is Halacha Yud, Perek Chav Aleph, Halacha Yud. Thank you very much for being the Rambam. The Rambam paskins over there that a woman, kol isha shekimona milasis malacha v'namalachis shecheves la'aseisim, any woman that will hold back from doing the malachas she's obligated to do for her husband, like wash her husband's feet, or cook for him and do all the other things that she's required to do for her husband. Not the halacha, she's required to do. By the way, in today's day and age, obviously a lot of things change. You understand yourself? That's why I'm not making a big deal, because you understand yourself, a lot of things change. By the way, this has nothing to do with even amongst Ashkenazim, a lot of things have changed from the medieval period to today, obviously. For example, teaching Torah to women. Women today are the biggest leaders of Emunah and Hashem. If not for the Jewish women today, our nation would fall apart in a half second. They're the ones keeping the holy Emunah. Just hold up before you shut that camera. So he says, you force her to physically do the work she has to do for her husband, even by taking a stick and hitting her. Says the Ravid, I'm telling you, the only subject where Ashkenazim became the pacifists and Sephardim were the ones that were close-minded was when it came to the matter of women. First of all, I shouldn't say Hashem closed-minded. I should say that is not closed-minded either way. It looks closed-minded. It's not actually closed-minded.
Is it old school?
Exactly. Thank you. That's what I wanted. Another one was just old school. I was looking for that term, old school. Not closed-minded. Not closed-minded, but old school.
Is old school not good?
Sagt er also,
Old school time.
says the Ravid. The Ravid is, of course, not an Ashkenazi, but he's pretty close because he's Provence, he's Provincial. The Ravid is not Ashkenazi, but he wasn't one of the Baliatesis, but he's Provincial. The Anglo, he comes from the land between the Loire, which is basically the south of France, which at the time was a separate country called Provence, Provincia.
3 or 4.
See, we're talking about the third one, Posquer, right? Roman Dominant Posquer. So in any case, he's Chatzi Ashkenazi, and he says, Omar Avro, says Avro, I never heard of torturing women with sticks. That's it. Finished. But he does say, he has the right to say, look, I'm not going to give you, if you don't do your job in the house, I'm not going to give you the parnasa. I mean, you can't expect me to give you parnasa. And then, if you want parnasa, you have to do your chore in the house. You can't be mazniach me and then expect me to give you all the parnasa. I mean, that's not fair. But do not use a stick to force it to do the job. He says, and he doesn't even bring up, it's interesting that Rambam doesn't find it necessary to even bring a source for his words. Because he just says, I never heard. That's how he speaks. The Rosh and the Marshal. The Rosh argues the Rambam straight up, and the Marshal goes to town on the Rambam here. The Marshal, I'm not going to read even now, it's too long. The Marshal goes to town on the Rambam and he says, what is this business hitting women with mice conference going on? But it's so interesting that the Marshal, when it comes to women, is much more open-minded. When it comes to killing your kids rather than having them convert, he says like this. We don't have the custom to kill our kids, but you do have a right to light the house on fire and then they'll die automatically. Yes, that's what the Mashal might say. Yes. We're going to say more about this. I can follow either way. Wow. The bottom line of Moisai is that Ashkenaz of the medieval period, Sefarad of the medieval period were very interesting places. And the battle between these two types of wives shaped Yiddishkeit as it is today. For more about that next week.
Wow.